It's time to end this. Right here, right now. Dirge of Cerberus, Final Fantasy VII.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, I have gone back to a very unique guilty pleasure style Final Fantasy game and played it for the first time. Dirge of Ceberus, Final Fantasy VII has been on my shelf for a couple of years now, and I've been waiting for a reason to play it just out of morbid curiosity. However, after this past winter where I played Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, we won't spoil anything here, but suddenly, this game became incredibly relevant. And it was there my appreciation of Final Fantasy VII as an overall story and universe began to grow with more love. Because you look at the base game as a timeless classic, but then you think of all of the layers that have been put on top of it. To some, unnecessary, but to me, each having their own flavor and purpose. Of course, famously, we have Zack's story in Crisis Core, one of people's favorites in all of the Final Fantasy series. You get something like Dirge of Ceberus, which is this more offshoot story focused on Vincent Valentine, who was an optional party member in the base game of Final Fantasy VII. And then you get even crazy mobile games like Ever Crisis nowadays. You get movies like Advent Children. There's just so much Final Fantasy VII, because we know Final Fantasy VII equals money. And now that we have Final Fantasy VII Remake, which to me functions more as a sequel to the base game rather than a traditional remake, I went back to Dirge of Ceberus to play it because it feels paramount on what's to come. So, how did I feel about this very controversial Final Fantasy game? Is it just a guilty pleasure, or is there more than what meets the eye? I'm going to get into all of that, ladies and gentlemen. If you are new here and you are into nostalgic retrospective content, we're trying to do more Final Fantasy because that's a popular one here on the channel. These games just take a while. I wanted a quick little dip in the pool with Final Fantasy. It's about a 10-ish hour game, so consider subscribing if that's your jam. Let's start off with the gameplay. Definitely the weirdest component of Dirge of Ceberus is the fact that it's a third-person shooter action RPG. You see, this is strange because when you look at Final Fantasy as a game, the only time I can think of third-person shooting appearing was after the Royal Edition had dropped with Final Fantasy 15, where you could run around and shoot as Prompto, which was pretty cool. But otherwise, I think of maybe Type 0 when it came out in the West as another example, but you don't find much third-person shooting in these games. But when you see what I consider one of the OG anime boys in Vincent Valentine, who for me personally at least sits there with like Sasuke Uchiha, Vegeta, like OG anime edgy guy with a heart of gold beneath it all. Ladies and gentlemen, having him, an optional party member, as the star of the show had me curious what kind of bells and whistles they attach to his gameplay style, because we know his limit break allows him to transform into a beast, but he's also a gunslinger. So the gunslinging in this game, not great, quite frankly. It's interesting because in Japan, there was an online component for Dirge of Ceberus, which was a traditional third-person shooting experience. There wasn't really any auto-aim or aim assist or soft lock whatsoever, so you're going to see in this age-old gameplay a lot of shooting and missing, but this was only for the Japanese crowd. What makes this more interesting is when you go into the base game that was released both in Japan as well as here in the States, you see that there is an obnoxiously large reticle for Vincent Valentine as he's running around, and the game effectively auto-targets for you. So a lot of the focus is on movement and navigating from area to area. But what it often reminded me of was, you know, when you went to the movie theaters in like the 90s and the early 2000s, and they had those on-rails sort of arcade games with the guns attached to them, and they would float you from one area to the other. That's sometimes how Dirge of Ceberus felt. There were times it was great, like when I was playing Silent Edge, my personal favorite stage in the entire game, and I had to take out a bunch of snipers perched up on rooftops. Some weren't targeting me at all, which was kind of weird, but others were, and it made me actually aim in and face a new type of challenge. But other times you're kind of floating from level to level. it is admittedly action-packed, and at times reminded me a bit of Resident Evil 5, which is a weird comparison I never expected to make, because in Resident Evil 5, there's a part where you're riding on the back of a vehicle, shooting down tons of monsters following you. I thought of that. And then also in that same mission, where you're out in the desert as Vincent, you have a bunch of motorcycles circling you, which again brought me back to Resident Evil 5. What's interesting about Dirge of Cerberus is naturally it was critically panned. The reason for that is because this is a game that came out in 2006 and many people thought was particularly uninspiring. As I was running through the game, I started to get nostalgic for something I had never played before. And I think that's because of the tech that Square Enix boasted in their older PS2 games. You see, they were really pushing the boundaries of the PS2. You think of a game like Final Fantasy XII and how it was such a big game, borderline boundless at times, but it all fit onto the PS2. I think of Kingdom Hearts 2 as a kid playing that game, and there were moments where Sora, Donald, Goofy, their faces were very static, but when the facial animations came to life, right, that's where they felt truly lifelike, and it felt like Square Enix was ahead of everybody. The lip syncing was on point, and Dirge of Cerebruus is loaded with that stuff from top to bottom, and you'll see in the manual when we go through it, they even talk about their Dolby surround sound experience. So this reminds me a bit of that era of Square Enix who was trying to push tech on the PS2. But back to the gameplay, as you're running around, you're going to be upgrading your weapons. You're going to find snipers, machine guns, and you can take the gil that you earn throughout the missions and completing mini missions throughout these stages and spend them on upgrades. You can also attach materia to these guns, so you can shoot electric balls, you can shoot fireballs. It's pretty cool. Or you can put on defensive buffs, for example. There's a lot of ways to customize your weapon that makes it a bit more of an RPG. Now, you can also take the XP that you've earned throughout a level and convert it into money if you wish to do that, which can add a little bit of a challenge unto itself if you want to stay a low level but really rank up all of your guns. You can customize the barrel of your weapon as well, which was really useful on the trusty revolver, right? So you have the short barrel, increase the rate of fire. You have the long barrel, better for at long range. But once you get the Hydra, which is the sniper rifle, you kind of don't need the long barrel. And then what's great is that you can equip all these different setups for your weapons and customize the materia for all of them. And then all you have to do is press L2 and you swap between all these different kits, which as the game develops and evolves the gameplay experience, yeah, a lot of times you're just sprinting down really uninspired hallways, but there are times it opens up, you see the potential of the game itself and just how fun it actually can be because you need situational awareness and you have different setups for different situations. So it increases the reactivity of the gameplay and how you want to approach certain levels when it's more open. I think that's why Silent Edge was my favorite. There were times you were in alleyways, but for the most part, you were running in big open areas where enemies could attack from any angle. It was still a fun time, especially when you got to jump around and see the cool flip animations. The melee attack has a lot of style to it. You see, the game is unapologetically relishing in the fact that Vincent Valentine just looks dope. We'll talk about the rest of that in a moment and how edgy he really is. But first, let's get into that complete in-box experience, shall we? Don't worry, I didn't forget. And here we have Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation 2. Can we talk about how just raw this cover art is? You're going to see Tetsuya Nomura pop off. I mean, the art here is absolutely phenomenal. So let's get to cracking this one open after reading the back, where it says, Midgar died, something survived. A mysterious organization has emerged from the devastation of Meteor Fall, and the enigmatic Vincent Valentine may be the only hope to save this shattered world. Set after the events in Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, this entirely new game features familiar characters, blazing gunfighting action, and the latest chapter of the world's favorite storyline. I just love here on the back, you get a look at all of the characters from the original cast in their Advent Children outfits. They just look so cool to me. But let's take a look on the inside where, again, I warned you all, Tetsuya doing Tetsuya things. So yeah, the disc art looks great. But the manual here, as we get into this manual, I just got to say that there's one weird thing about it that I've personally never seen before in any of the complete box experiences we've done here on this channel, for PlayStation 2 especially. You're going to see here upon opening up, by the way, fully illustrated with a beautiful looking Vincent Valentine to kick us off, is you get into the controls and you're probably like, well, what's the big deal here, right? PS2 game, PS2 controls, right? Well, it's here on the next page that you get keyboard and mouse controls, which I've just never seen in a PlayStation 2 manual. I just thought that was something kind of interesting to point out off the rip. But otherwise, you're going to see how it uses Dolby Pro Logic 2, which was pushing tech back then. They break down some extra features like the art gallery, the sound gallery, as well as extra missions that you can go on to test your skills. Continue on deeper, you see how serious they take their story here, because they break down not only the tale of Final Fantasy VII in case you need a bit of a recap, which I thought was pretty helpful as someone who hasn't played it since probably 2012. It's been a long while, but also they have the prologue here, which I think is actually kind of necessary to the story. When I was playing through this game, I felt like when it came to the story, they kind of just assume you have all this background information, and even little things like, well, where is Vincent to start this game off, is kind of quickly breezed over. And so I just think the setup is sort of rushed, where reading this here, this would be one of those in the car driving home with your copy of the game reads that would be perfect for you. And obviously developers made games expecting you to read this. Getting a little bit deeper, they break down the characters, and notice here on the left you got Reeve, you have Yuffie, you have Vincent, right? You don't see the main cast that you would typically see in Final Fantasy VII. No Cloud Strife, no Tifa Lockhart, none of that stuff, right? You see these three right here, which I thought was really cool to start things off. We're going to learn a bit about these Fiats, which is, you know, part of the Deep Ground faction. We're going to talk about a lot in the base game when we get into the story in a moment here. And so you're going to see a lot of Shulk, Azul's like this menacing character. You got Rosso here, and then continuing on, just little things here like stage missions, what they are, what results you get, leveling up, and how you can spend that on stuff in the shop like upgrades, what I already talked about. They break down items, what every piece of your gun is, the status effects and what those mean, the parameters, customizing your weapon, all that cool stuff, configuring it. Temp save is a part of the game, which I thought was interesting. So there's no save points. You just got to finish the mission. And I died once in this game, and it sent me all the way back to the beginning, which I thought was kind of frustrating when things ramped up in difficulty later on, and you got to keep restarting. So I just, not the best choice there. But if you want to temp save and go live your life and then come back to a mission, you can, don't worry, you can do that. But these stages aren't that long, especially as you know the layout and where the missions are, and you start to feel out some of the hallways and alleys and not getting lost. Then they're really, really quick. But continuing on, magic, melee attacks, all that fun stuff, limit break. You can turn into the Beast as Vincent, and I thought that was really cool, the Galleon Beast. It just doesn't control all that well, which I thought was a little bit disappointing, but you know, again, if this page isn't anything to go by, it just really relishes in the fact that Vincent Valentine is cool as hell. He looks dope, and like this is what you'd actually see on the main menu, which is behind me throughout most of this video. And then here towards the back, they're actually promoting another Dirge of Ceberus game called Lost Episode, which is a phone game. And then on the back, they're promoting Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria. We still got to play Valkyrie Profile here on this channel, and I have this game complete in box. I bought it last year in Boston when I was there for PAX East, and so we're gonna get to those. But that's your, as you can tell, complete in-box experience for Dirge of Ceberus Final Fantasy VII. So let's talk a bit about that story now, shall we? That was like the main reason I was here. I knew the gameplay would be kind of hit or miss for me, but what about that story? Is it a hot take to say that this is kind of like a Galaxy Brain plot? You see, you had, we'll call the event Meteor Fall, based off the Final Fantasy VII lore, and this game picks up 3 years after that. Now, when you see Vincent Valentine in Advent Children, you don't get a huge gauge on what his next play is, but you know that overall this world is trying to recover from what Sephiroth had done to it. And so that's where the game starts, is you see a town in Midgar, Calm, beginning to celebrate because, yay, we've rebuilt, only for this brand new organization to pop in, start gunning people down, and they're looking for Vincent Valentine. And why is that? Well, that's what the story's really all about, and it makes Vincent this central piece alongside Yuffie and Cait Sith. One of the things I liked most about this story was actually that they focus, when you look at the base game of Final Fantasy VII, I think Square's objective here with this one was to take a look at, hey, who is optional, who is missable, or who didn't play a huge factor in the main story. And I think of, naturally, Vincent and Yuffie. Now, Vincent was more important than Yuffie, I'd say, but Yuffie was kind of cast off to the side. So seeing her in the very starting point of the game, fully animated, was pretty cool, right? Brings a bit of a spotlight to her. Of course, we see her in Advent Children alongside the rest of the Seven Squad, but Point being is this game kind of puts a spotlight on these types of characters. Having some of the main interactions be between Vincent and Reeve, I thought was actually a really cool setup for the plot, especially if you're into the little nitty-gritty of Final Fantasy VII and its world. Now, with that said, the main reason I was here was because of its villain characters. And I have to say that Deep Ground as an organization and the Sviets, not the most gripping because of their goals ultimately being a this world must be cleansed type approach. Yeah, we've seen it a million times before, and in particular it feels uninspired, but it let Tetsuya Nomura kind of go crazy with the character design, which is what I think he does best out of anything else. So you get characters like Vice that look really awesome, and so that type of stuff did light my fire. But overall, as a faction that's trying to activate this weapon and pretty much use the life stream against itself, if you pay really close attention to 7 lore, yeah, this is going to actually be kind of cool, especially because I think there are moments the game really touches on Vincent and his trauma and his guilt with what happened with Hojo and what happened with his mother and how he had to atone for his sins and why he ever ended up in the coffin in the first place. I just feel that stuff, unfortunately, as a character takes too much of a back seat, and that they probably would have been better off leaning into that more than this villain group that wants to destroy the world. Because the reality is, 7 already did that with Sephiroth, and what was interesting about that is Sephiroth was, especially when you see in Crisis Core, a bit more of a story on a descent into madness, right? A hero gone rogue. And so I feel like that story's already been told, and there's a bit of retreading old ground. Also, given the game's understandably short runtime, you have a plethora of new, cool-looking characters that don't get enough time to truly establish themselves outside of their very much surface-level point in the plot. And so I found that also a little disappointing, though expected, again, given the runtime. But I think the best question to answer is, did I regret the time spent? Did I have fun? And yeah, I did have fun, and I didn't regret my time spent with the game because now the title has more purpose. It reminds me of what happened with the Clone Wars and the prequels, where I always loved the prequels, probably because it's what I grew up with, especially Revenge of the Sith being my favorite Star Wars movie. However, a lot of people didn't feel that way, and I get why. They are pretty flawed in the scheme of things. However, the Clone Wars came in and really put some meat on the bones of the actual story that was there, and it made the movies better for so many people because they fell in love with that universe. And I think about what 7 Remake's doing, 7 Remake Intergrade and Rebirth, hopefully, and what it's doing, and how it's adding life to these older games that otherwise you could kind of breeze over. Crisis Core feels more important than ever. Dirge of Cerberus has more relevance than the obscure guilty pleasure Final Fantasy VII title, and I think that's actually really cool. So beyond just investment in what's to come, I think Dirge of Cerbерus is just a fun time in general. It's not a great third-person shooter. I think it's weird that the online gameplay had more third-person shooting elements than the actual base game, but nonetheless, running around as Vincent doing flips and being a cool, edgy dude is cool to me. So I enjoyed my time with it, and I do recommend it. It's a cheap game nowadays. I actually think I overpaid for it because I bought it during the pandemic for about 35 bucks. And when I checked on eBay, it's going for about 20, 25 now. So it's dipped a bit. So it's actually the cheapest it's been from what I've seen. And I think it's pretty shocking given this feels like one of those games that collectors would say, oh, it's the rare, obscure Final Fantasy VII title. Yeah, bump that thing up. Nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII after my first time playing through it. Let me know your thoughts on this game down below. Did you enjoy it a ton? Are you not a big fan of it? Did you buy it on launch day, perhaps? To me, this was a very late discovery in my gaming career. So I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts down below. And with that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.